and we see the position on the board. So he's opening up the diagonal with his first move, Peter, and we immediately saw a response by Magnus, moving a multi-purpose pawn there, not only opening up the queen, eyeing the f4 square, but eventually that black bishop on d8 also finds development.
Yes, but this is exactly the big challenge in freestyle chess, yeah, that if you develop the bishop, for example, to c7, which looks like a very nice square, but then what do you do with the queen on b8? Yeah, it's kind of a very, very complicated question. We did see g3, f5 being played. Magnus, look at this. Black is already threatening to win the game with bishop d5, the rook on h1. Okay, it's not a win yet because white can play knight f3, but certainly it's kind of annoying. And also just get harmony in the position. Yeah, I'm really liking what Magnus is doing. On the other hand, everything depends on long-term prospects. Yeah, that's yeah, knight f3. White is also stabilizing the position. It's so tough to play.
And that's what we love about it. The players really have to put their thinking caps on from the very start. Usually we see the knight from g1 jumping onto f3, and that would be completely standard. But here it lands on f3 from that king square. White king on c1, already a half-castled position. For white, if you can get, and for black, if you can develop the queen and the bishop, you simply put that rook from a8 on d8 and call it a day for your king. You say, I've got my king to safety, I'm finishing my development. Do you think that's going to be a priority in this position?
I'm not sure, yeah, because it comes at a cost of some other things. One of the problems I'm seeing with this position that, for example, how do we develop this knight on f1? Yeah, if it jumps to e3, then it blocks the diagonal of the bishop on g1. Yeah, so I'm somehow even tempted to play something like d3 knight 1 to d2, eventually maybe bishop f2, then do something with my c pawn and slowly develop. The good news is that it does not seem like there is any direct confrontation in the position. Yeah, if there is no direct confrontation, then we can afford ourselves to take it slowly. Yeah, but if, for example, black might play something like d6 and we threaten to open up the center with d5 immediately, then we have to adjust to it instantly.
Wow, Nicholas, it's already an exciting start to this game and the players are slowing down. We see a move by Magnus, and this is the one that I was hinting at earlier. You open up the bishop diagonal. If there is a trade on b6, it would be on Magnus's terms, opening up the a-file.
Yes, this is definitely a very interesting approach by Magnus to trade the bishops, to open up the a-file. I would like to jump to another game because the players have taken a very different approach in the opening as expected, and in the game between Abdusattorov and Ding Liren, it has gone pretty well for the player from Uzbekistan. So let's have a look. He started with d4, so not like Gukash with 1 f4, and Ding responded with d5, alright. And c3, we've seen this move actually in a lot of games, and as we're going to see, it makes sense to open up the queen, open up this diagonal for the queen, and also open up the bishop. And now, after knight d6 to control the center, f3 was played. A good move to play e4 next to have a strong center. And in fact, Ding Liren allowed this. After knight g6, e4 was played. And here, white has a beautiful center. And believe it or not, in this position already white is in very, very good shape according to the computer. Already a very clear advantage. But if you look at the position, it does make sense because white has a beautiful center. The pieces can come out naturally. The black pieces look not so well placed, not so harmonious. So quite a great start for Abdusattorov. And Ding Liren might be continuing to struggle, Tanya.
Very nicely pointed out, and I think the key point here that you made was that how easy it is for white to develop the pieces. That knight from e1 can jump to d3. That bishop from d1 can land on g4 as Peter is highlighting the squares, and it comes in with a check. You're getting your pieces out with a check. You already control the center. Eventually the queen from b1 can move one step ahead to c2, and that castle, Peter, that I was dreaming of at the start, we might see it become a reality.
Yes, and then it makes perfect sense, yeah, because you are also immediately attacking black's vulnerable spots, yeah, and I do feel like black's king, yeah, bishop g4 check is played, yeah, you are kind of provoking the move, pawn to e6, yeah, Nodirbek is going queen c2, getting ready to castle as quickly as possible. Black is in a lot of trouble, and I feel like Nodirbek is some kind of a freestyle chess monster. Yeah, he's so energetic, so he's so aggressive, putting tremendous pressure on his opponents right from the start.
He was the semi-finalist at the Fischer Random World Championship in 2022 when Hikaru Nakamura knocked him out in the semis. But what a run he had in that one. He definitely has experience in this format, which, as you had pointed out earlier in our broadcast, is so key to understand how to maximize your development potential, how quickly to play with the tempos on the board. And here we see White's play is just flowing with tempos. Meanwhile, that black bishop on g8, caged by its own pawns on e6. The bishop on d8, caged by its own pawn on f6. It's still very difficult to imagine black getting an activity. And Peter, you're pointing out, in this case, should I call it a long castle?
Well, it's short. It's short. I'm going on the king's side. But yeah, certainly this gives some stability. Yeah? If black is able to evacuate his king from the danger zone, and the king on c8 cannot really stay there forever. In fact, black even cannot really afford to castle long because it would still run into some problems. Yeah, Ding is trying to stabilize his position and limit the damage. And let's not forget, it's freestyle chess, so at the moment, for example, it might look very good for white, then suddenly black stabilizes and in a couple of moves it might look like black has a decent position. Yeah, so I'm still a bit confused how to evaluate all these things, but at the moment it really looks still very good for white.
Well, it's a long way to short side castling, as you're pointing out, which might be the king's safety. But of course, we might even see the position explode with the h-pawn moving forward at some point, trying to get that activity against the black king. Can we conclude by saying that Notebek is happy with the opening outcome in this one?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, more than happy. And also look at the clock situation. Yeah, he feels that this is a type of position that he can play by hand. Yeah, because you really feel already, you know, where the pieces belong, and you don't have to make really difficult strategical decisions. Yeah, it's much more for black that for me it was easy to highlight bishop c7, short castle, and put your king into safety, but then black's queen on b8 will be stuck. You highlighted beautifully that h4, h5 is coming, kicking that knight away, and yeah, maybe even we have to move away from this board because it just hurts my eyes to look at it from black's perspective.
Oh. Well, if anything hurts Peter's eyes, we immediately shift the focus. Let's bring up our bird's eye view. And Nicholas, you can break down the action and the opening approaches by the players in these different openings that we're seeing in front of us.
Yeah, let's turn to a game that we haven't seen so far. The game between Vincent Keymer and Levon Aronian. And here also a similar approach was taken as in the game between Abdusattorov and Ding. So if we go from the start, d4 was played. So this was also Abdusattorov's choice, and here Aronian went for the, let's say, Dutch approach with f5, controlling the center, opening up the bishop. c3, again this move to open up the queen, hitting instantly the pawn on f5, which is why Aronian played g6, and play in the center, e4, instantly, to bring the queen out. Good choice by Vincent. F takes e4, queen takes e4, and now c6 has been played. Vincent has been thinking. I also noticed this in the last game against Magnus. He is taking his time in the beginning, but as we pointed out earlier, the very first moves are very, very important, so it does make sense. He has a good position here. The computer is suggesting to drop the queen back to e2, which isn't very logical to me, and I would bring out one of the knights. It's not so easy. In fact, there's also this bishop d5 idea we have to be careful for. Difficult to organize here, not quite harmonious, but the queen is active. This is good. So Vincent is doing well right now, but he needs to figure out how to bring his remaining pieces into the game. But once again, c3, e4, queen out seems to be a good approach in this starting position of freestyle chess.
I have some breaking info to share with all of you. We entered the players' meeting. The players' meeting had not yet started. I'm there with Vincent. Levon joins us. Big hug. I haven't seen Levon for ages. Very happy to meet. We start discussing about freestyle chess, and then Levon says, you know what? Yeah, people have not yet appreciated that in Fischer random chess, the Dutch defense with d4 f5 is really strong. And what we see now, Vincent was there in this discussion, Levon told me d4 f5, and what did we see between these two gentlemen? extraordinary players, the moves d4, f5, and Vincent probably had it that, yes, I will not let him get his typical Dutch defense. I'm challenging that center immediately with c3, g6, e4. Just felt like I have to share this info because this is so valuable and we see it really happen between them. It's stunning.
Yeah, and Lavan Aronian now is walking the talk. He mentioned it and now he shows that, you know what, I'm going to prove my point, Vincent. I told you in the technical meeting about the Dutch defense. It's on the board. Show me your cards. Show me how you handle it with white. And it also reminds me that before the start of this round, it was Gukash who was actually analyzing these kind of setups. We spoke about the Dutch then. So he had it in his mind as well. And while Vincent thinks about what to do with this queen that's out early on and it can come under fire. The knight can jump from e8 to f6. The bishop, as you pointed out, can go from g8 to d5 and it can put pressure on the white's queen. Vincent taking a think. Peter, let's zoom out for a moment. Let's get our bird's eye view and do a quick overhaul on the four boards and take a look at the action on each one of them. Let's start from our extreme left. It's Nordebek Abdusatrov, the youngest ever World Rapid Champion. He's 18 years old now. He won the World Rapid Championship in 2010. And we see a lot more of a solid approach in that one. We will deep dive into it, but let's just do a quick overview. What do you think about the other three boards? Which one catches your attention?
Well, I think that we haven't really been looking at Alireza against Fabiano. And both of them had won their first game. They are in fantastic shape. Let's take a closer look and look at this. They are also having tremendous amount of self-confidence by playing so quickly, right, in this format. And I'm looking at this bishop on h2. What is this bishop doing on h2 after white was forced to close it with g3? Nicholas, do you have any thoughts for us?
Well, I'm thinking, Peter, this is probably going to hurt your eyes to look at this position for too long. The bishop on h2 is not in great shape. Let's just slowly go through the opening moves. Here we saw e4, e5, so a different approach. Again, this move c3 that we've seen over and over. Bishop b3 you also saw in the Carlson game. Now this g3 move early on, if I may stop it here, quite an interesting choice, g3 to restrict the knight coming to f4, but this bishop is not happy about it and will remain unhappy throughout the next moves as we go on. And bishop b6 coming out, white occupies the center right, now h4, h5 makes a lot of sense. And now, special moment, here comes the long, short castle that we've talked about. Let's review this once again. The special rule in freestyle chess, the king can castle short if there's nothing in between and the squares are not under attack. And this is what we see here, and we end up in the typical short castle that we know from normal chess. Suddenly a king is safely tucked away here, and in fact firouzja did the exact same thing. And now we're almost resembling a normal position, except for this guy on h5, which is absolutely terrible. I think the black pieces are better placed and look very harmonious. And I think Sarana is doing an excellent job. What is the entrance saying? It is agreeing. It is giving a clear advantage for black already. It's the bishop. The bishop is a big problem, isn't it?
What bishop? That's not a bishop. That's just a big pawn in white's position, right on h2. g3 played, blocking his own bishop, perhaps wanting to defend that h4 pawn. A really strange decision, taking control of f4, but that bishop on h2 is a big eyesore. The other thing that stands out to me in this position, as Nicholas was playing it from the top, Peter, is that what we have in front of us, it looks like a standard chess position. Apart from that bishop, it just feels like, you know, white has castle, develop the pieces. We see this big tension in the center. Who will blink first? That last move, getting d5 in. Which pawns do you trade? But to me, it looks more like an opening out of a standard chess game rather than a freestyle chess game.
Yeah, actually, the first impression that I got when I looked at this, that this is a kind of Italian opening that went extremely well for black. And those who have been watching my commentary, they know exactly that I'm always very critical about any kind of bishop g5 Italians, because that bishop may end up in trouble, but getting in so much trouble than right here, right now, I haven't really seen. Black has perfect harmony. White has to make difficult decisions, and yeah, now we see that white is giving up the center with e takes d5. Not a happy choice. The queen from e8 beautifully protecting the knight on g6 because this needs protection. Otherwise, the queen from b1 is eyeing that knight. Perfect harmony for black. Very tough task ahead for Alireza.
Yeah, and let's also just point out that it's not voluntarily that Alireza put that bishop on h2 and the pawn on g3. This came out of a freestyle chess position where the players started, and maybe you can highlight the square. The bishop was originally on that g1 square, and it had to come out. So finding a way to get the king into safety, to get more pieces into safety, this is the structure, this is the opening that Alireza has chosen. The pawn was moved to g3 to bring another piece out into the game. So it's all about, like you said, you sometimes have to sacrifice one piece's position to be able to take out another.
Yes, but here we see that actually Fabi managed to get everything done correctly. Yeah, he was able to trade that bishop somehow, and yeah, now we see that Alireza is trying to make sense of his position, going after black's only defenseless pawn, the weakness on h5. I kind of like this attitude because if it's getting unpunished, then at least there is some kind of a new flow in white's position.
And the knight falls back, not only attacking the queen, but defending that h5 pawn that you highlighted. Completely agree, Peter, with everything that you said, that this feels like a really nice Italian for black. You've gotten rid of the light squared bishop. The dark squared bishop that white has is not even a bishop currently. At some point, perhaps we might see Alireza go all out with the move g4, just trying to get that piece into the game to promote that big pawn back into a bishop.
Yes, basically if white gets g4 and king h1, rook g1, suddenly white can get some initiative going on the king side. Clearly black is trying to get that knight from c7 to e6, but that's why I'm loving this maneuver of queen f5 and queen h3, very well played by Alireza, making sure that that knight won't land on e6. So yes, black pushes e4 and black will play f5 so that please forever forget about g3, g4.
That's a really nice positional concept, really trapping that bishop on h2, taking control of that g4 square, the only way for white to actually break free. We will keep an eye out on this one, but let's head over to the GOAT, Magnus Carlson, who is taking on Gukash. And I see, Nicholas, you've got an update for us. Quite an exciting position.
Yeah, it looks very different than what we've seen in the other games, as it often so happens with the freestyle chess positions. So let's go back a few moves where we last saw it after c3. We saw the bishop came out to b6, trading bishops. And let's go through it here. The bishops were traded, the rook takes back. Obviously the knight is coming out, trying to control the center. b5 suddenly, gaining some space here to also open up the queen on this diagonal. And now g5, a pawn sacrificed by Magnus. And here we have the current position. The last move was rook to e1. Here was the threat that black takes this pawn on g5, because if the knight was to take back, then the rook could be taken on g1 by the queen. So this is why Gukash moved the rook out of the way, and I'm still trying to make sense of the position. There's still a lot of awkwardly placed pieces. This bishop on d1, the queen is not in the game, but this bishop on g8 is also not in the game. It is a very difficult position to evaluate. White is up a pawn, so this is good, but on the other hand the knights are well placed here. Also it's a double pawn. I'm really not sure what to make of it. I look at the engine, it says white is a little bit better, but honestly it doesn't mean much in this position. Who would you prefer here, Peter? What do you think?
Well, it's a very difficult position to really evaluate. I do understand that I first liked Magnus's position, yeah, that he was the one who sacrificed the pawn with g5, so clearly had some intentions. On the other hand, I also see that white has a clear plan of eventually going queen d3 and queen e3. Just activating that queen, offering a queen trade, we are pawn up. We don't really afraid getting the queen traded. On the other hand, I do recall we have seen this pre-game analysis there by Magnus, Levon and Fabi, and we did speak about this, that was some banker gambit kind of strategy. Yeah? So this kind of sacrifice and then going h6, g takes h6 and getting some play is maybe in Magnus's mind, but I don't see it really working so nicely, so I don't believe that h6 is probably the best move here.
I'm liking the extra pawn for white currently. Magnus has to prove his compensation. Also notice how the pawns on c3, g3 take away some key squares from that black knight on e6, not really allowing it to jump into white's camp. Magnus has to think about how to actually try to get the initiative that he sacrificed the pawn for. I would love to improve that bishop on g8, the one idea that comes to mind, and Magnus does it. He plays the move bishop f7, also eyeing the square h5. Maybe at some point the rook can line up on the g file, Peter, putting pressure on that g5 pawn. Ideas like bishop h5, which I think has been stopped by this last move. Gukash playing bishop to b3 is saying, now when you move that bishop to either g6 or h5, he's going to grab that knight on e6, destroying black's pawn structure.
Yes, at least that's a serious possibility. On the other hand, it gives up the light squares, and eventually if we know already that black can castle, black can simply castle like this, then if we get this transformation of structure, let me just put a few moves just so that we better understand what we are talking about. Yeah, the structure is terrible. White has this e5 square. On the other hand, if black castles, then this combination of black's monster bishop on h5, the light square bishop, and the rook, posing some real trouble against white's coordination. Yeah, so such a complex stuff. It really requires a lot of time to understand and to evaluate what's really going on here.
And that's why Magnus has slowed down as well. He's thinking right now, after this last move by Gukash, does he want to destroy his pawn structure for all these points that you're making, open files, open diagonals, and unchallenged light square bishop? The more I look at it, the more I start liking it. Perhaps Magnus will decide for another approach, trying to just develop his pieces further, lining up, improving the position of that rook on the h-file. He goes for bishop h5. I was just wanting to make one more point. In freestyle chess, you have to really watch out for hanging pawns. And I think if you go back one move, the idea of rook to g8, and suddenly you notice that pawn on h7 is not defended. It might be a natural move, but this perhaps would have allowed Gukash to step up with that e5 pawn. And now that queen on b1, which should have been a knight at the start of the game, suddenly opens up and everything falls apart on the king side. So I was just pointing out rook g8 would have perhaps walked into the idea of e5. There's of course bishop g6 and things get more complicated, Peter, but you have to always think about hanging pawns in freestyle chess.
Yes, you have to take everything into consideration. But I also feel like there had been some move. Yeah, Magnus is now leaning back.
I think he played.
No, I'm not sure, because that may be my move. Can Nicholas update the position? Wow!
Castle.
Yes.
Whoa.
Wow, you castle and you lean back. You are enjoying yourself. Wow, what are we witnessing here?
Unbelievable. It's a long way to the shark castle, as we like to say in freestyle chess. He puts the king on g8, the rook goes to f8. We were talking about activating the rook, but h7 might be weak. Magnus finds a cool style to do it. He says, you know what, my king is going to go all the way, defend the h7 square. Do you like this decision, Nicholas?
I mean, this is a shocking move which we didn't have on our radar at all, but you always have to have it on your radar in freestyle chess, that suddenly here actually both castles were possible. Black could have put the rook over here, I believe, or as he did, he castled all the way to the other side. And it looks risky to me at first because the king is open here. There's not a lot of protections in front of, not a lot of pawns which protect the king in front of it. However, we see the rook instantly lined up on the open file, and I think Magnus is really going for the initiative here. He has sacrificed a pawn. He wants to go for maximum piece activity, maybe bishop h5 next. And, well, the engine, what is the engine saying about this? It says, okay, you can play like this. It's okay. White is still a little bit better. Maybe bring the queen out now. This was an idea we talked about already. Queen to d3, maybe queen e3 next. It is a very open game and quite a bold decision by Magnus to play like this, Peter.
Yeah, look at Gukash. He's completely shocked. I think anyone who would be sitting there on the white side, Magnus Carlson going for short castle. I mean, what's wrong with you? What is that move? Yeah, and probably the reason why Magnus actually selected this move, he just noticed it and he felt like probably this is such a cool move. I want to make it no matter what the consequences are. And as Nicholas said, yeah, there are a lot of hidden dynamics in the position. So castles is not as insane as it looks. But if you would have asked me before the short castle open, I would have said no, it will never ever happen. But it did happen. It just I'm so happy that I'm here. I'm witnessing this. because this is just fantastic stuff.
It's also the awareness that it's even a legal move on the board. The fact, because you're just thinking about putting that rook on d8, keeping your king on c8, a queenside castle, but this was just, the shock value is massive of this move. And we were making a point about how the king side, it looks like, wait a second, there's no g7 pawn. You're just putting your king on an open line. But actually, Magnus plans to use Gukash's g5 pawn as a defensive shield here. Gukash wants to get an h4, h5, g6 in attack. Notice how all of White's army is on the queen side. It's actually perhaps the safest square for the black king. You're using the g-pawn as a shield. All of White's army is on the other side of the board. No rooks on the h in the g line. This is going to get interesting very quickly, Peter.
It is already very interesting, and I feel that this is incredible in freestyle chess, that we can give so many arguments to so many of the decisions, and probably so many counter arguments as well. Yeah, if we are listing the pros and cons and the players have to make that decision, we do see that actually both of these players had taken their time. They are more or less equal on the clock. And yes, Nicholas, you have some update?
Yes, you can finish your pawn.
No, I'm already done. I'm ready to jump to you.
All right, yeah. I would like to jump to another game, as here Gukash is taking a think how to continue, and we'll see how this develops. So I'm looking at the game between up to the turf and Ding Liren. We last, I believe, looked at this around this position. We said White is in good shape. So let's just catch up briefly how it continued from here. We saw the bishop coming out, the long castle in this one. The queen is putting pressure on the pawn. The pawn was dropped. Up to the turf did win this pawn on e6 here, and this was just a healthy pawn that he took. And he has been in good shape since. We see here the rook coming forward, some trades, knight coming forward, and now we actually enter an endgame. Maybe let me pause here so it's not too quick. So to understand what happened here, the bishop is pinning the knight on this diagonal because the queen is behind it. So black played knight to e check, knight to e2 check. White gave up the queen because the other queen is also under attack. Queen takes g3. Pawn takes, wow, what a wild sequence, guys. Just to point out here, queen takes e7, which you could make a point. Let me also do the desperado. Queen would be refuted by queen g5 check, so the queen goes to safety, and then black could take back the white queen on e7. So this is why queen takes e7 was not played. He took back on g3, rook takes e2, and we reach this endgame after knight f4. Rook e3, some more moves have been played, the rooks have been traded, and we reach this position where white is up a pawn still, and it is quite a healthy pawn. I would expect g4 now to be played. This pawn is under attack, and this is quite a normal position, suddenly a normal endgame, which could also result from the normal starting position with a healthy extra pawn for up to the turf, who's looking good, and Ding Liren seems to continue to struggle, Tanya.
100% agree. White has that extra pawn. The rook on h1 already makes sure that the black king cannot get to the center of the board. The rook can even slide onto the center of the board himself. Rook to e1 with such few pieces left. The knight on d3 really nicely placed as well. White can slowly improve his position. We might see rook e1, king d2 coming forward. Eventually the c pawn might start marching up the board. For Ding Liren, it's a game for two results. He has to do his best to hold this position. Things could go wrong. If the rooks are traded off here, I think White's chances, winning chances, increase dramatically, Peter.
Yeah, I think that White has tremendous winning chances. I also don't really see how black can block the position. Yeah, it would be desirable to get that pawn to b5. And if we are talking about rook trade, because white is threatening to invade with the rook, yeah, you can't really let this happen. It means that black also needs to play a move like rook e8, but then what happens after the rook trade with rook e1? We are pawn down, we don't really want to continue trading pieces. I think that this is practically lost. And there is another argument that Nicholas highlighted. Yeah, Ding is so far struggling in this tournament. He is not yet settled in with this freestyle chess. But this is exactly what we talked about and why we love this format. If it would be a knockout tournament, then with these two defeats, he would be eliminated from the tournament. And who knows, maybe exactly these 7 round-robin games will give him the feeling that how this really works. And the knockout stages, we will be seeing a monster Ding Liren. You can never be ruled out with a player like him.
And I think that's the ding that everyone's waiting to see as well. Ding struggled in the earlier Tata Steel. Right now, it's not been a great start for him, but it's a long tournament to go. And as you said, the round robin is a great warm-up for the upcoming classical knockout. Now, the move G6, of course, wants to trade off as many pawns as possible. Nodebek says, no, if you trade on my terms, if black was to take on F5, that just helps Nodebek a lot. The pawn structure gets improved. You've made a lot of progress. Meanwhile, Ding will keep the tension on, because if white was to trade on G6, it just leaves white with the doubled G pawn weakness, which would work in Ding's favor. So for Nodebek, it looks like he has to show some good technique here. We'll zoom out of this one. Let's get an update on all our other boards. Let's bring up the bird's eye view and take a look at the action that's happening. We see the eval bar. It's a bit up and down on all the boards. On our extreme right, Nodebek in the endgame that we just discussed in driver's seat. Meanwhile, Fabiano Caruana against Alireza Firouzja. At least the evaluation bar says that Fabi is the one who's doing well, even though I don't see a single piece out from Black's camp.
No, because let's not get fooled. Yeah, that this is not the these are not the current positions. Yeah, this is something is wrong. So let's head to Nicholas.
Yes.
I think Nicholas had all the updates.
Yeah, let's take a look at the Firouzja game against Caruana. This is the current position that we're seeing here, I believe.
Sorry, Nicholas, maybe we can start from the beginning, because
yes.
and just see how we got here.
Yes, absolutely. We'll start where we last looked at it to understand what happened. We're really sad about the bishop on h2 around here. We took a look, d5. I think this is maybe the last time we checked, and we were really sad about this bishop, but Firouzja found a ingenious way to consolidate his position, actually create a fortress in a way. So let's take a look at it together. He brought the knight to f4 and allowing a double pawn, but taking control of the g5 square, which would be one of the levers for black to open up the position. The bishop has another square now, and it is very ugly. Let's be honest, it is very ugly, but it's also very safe for white. And in the following moves, white consolidated some more, brought his pieces to better squares, trying to tie down black a little bit here on the g6 square, but I'm not sure if that really achieved so much, to be honest, as we see the knight coming to g4. So the rooks are coming back, and the other rook is coming back. The king is improved. And honestly, when I look at this position now, I'm thinking this will be a draw soon, because I don't really see a way forward for either side. White has one target, the pawn on a6. Black can defend this target pretty well. And black has a target on the pawn on h4, which white can defend very well. There are no real levers that I can see, because g5, a5 for black are very difficult to achieve, and c4 also seems pretty much impossible. So I would expect a draw very soon here. How do you guys feel about it, Peter?
Well, the only idea that I see is some bishop h6, queen d6, targeting the f4 pawn. Because that's the vulnerable pawn. I'm wondering that exactly at that moment, does white suddenly trade on g4? Do we have to be concerned about this? Because h take g4 is kind of still a blockade. F take g4 would allow f5, and Fabi goes for this.
Putting pressure on that f4 pawn, Alireza needs to find a way to hold the defense. From a positional perspective, this just looks so good for black. It feels like a dream position. You've got your knight on g4. You've got all your pawns on the opposite color of your own dark squared bishop. So you've got the stronger bishop. Look at that bishop on g3. It's a bad bishop, but maybe a good defensive piece. It does defend that pawn on f4, but it looks like if anyone's trying to push, it has to be Fabi. He goes for your plan. The knight falls back on g2. I think for Fabi, he would have loved to have the h-file open from a long-term perspective. Had Alireza chosen the other defense of trading on g4, it would have given additional chances to black along the opening up of the h-file after h takes g4. So more pressure. But the big question, you have all these beautiful points in the position. How do you break through? And I think Fabi is showing the way. He is hinting at a future e3 pawn sacrifice, pawn break, and if done at the right time, maybe the rooks will double up on the e-file. And e3 is the plan that black wants to achieve.
Yeah, I think that simply having this position from black side is kind of very, very pleasant. Yeah, that rook e6. I felt like this is also very harmonious, making sure that the two rooks are protecting the a6 pawn. You can also fall back with the queen to e7. Nicholas already highlighted also that, yeah, there is the weakness on h4, so if after queen e7 white jumps back with the knight to e3, then we can try to regroup that bishop to f6, hint at h4, then try to provoke then knight g2, and who knows, eventually then some e3 might be a possibility. But clearly e3 often can not only be captured, but it can also be answered with f2, f3. Fabi goes back with the knight. Another question, like, can we transpose this knight somewhere? Yeah, because white is completely pegged. This gives black so much time and so much freedom.
And the advantage of having this much space for Fabi is that he can move his pieces around from one side of the board, reroute his minor pieces, reroute his major pieces in a much more fluid way than white can find defenses. White has to keep so many things together. So even if the evaluation bar at this moment says the position is level, I'm not sure if it says that to start with, but if it does, it's such a difficult position to play with the white pieces because you have to keep so many things under defense and you don't have enough space to shuffle around easily. You have to control the f4 pawn. You have to keep the h4 pawn defended. Threat is better than execution. Always watch out for the e3 break that might be coming up. Your idea of the knight being rerouted, Fabi has got several plans. Perhaps the knight will land on c7, freeing up the major pieces from the defense of that a6 pawn. Eventually, we can see the lining up of the Alekhines battery might appear on the e-file. It just feels like there's so much pressure. And for Alireza, it's going to be an uphill task to keep everything contained in the position.
Yeah.
So let me take it away to another game that we've been following, the game between Gukash and Magnus Carlson, because I have some exciting update for you here. Magnus has sacrificed another pawn to take the initiative and is really taking over in this game. Check this out. So queen c2 was played, developing the queen. That makes a lot of sense. Now a5, hinting at the intentions here of starting a pawn storm on the queen side, opening the white king, which cannot castle anymore to the king side since this rook has already moved. So white cannot copy what black did. And now e5. This was an unfortunate decision. The computer suggests something like g6. What a difficult move to play with the pawn, that if the pawn takes, then the knight can come forward, or e5 can be played even stronger to keep an eye on this pawn and open up the king a little bit more. And if the bishop takes, then the knight can come forward with effect. But this is quite a difficult move to play for white. So let's see what Gukash played instead. He went e5. And this is what Carlson had seen from afar, that he can sacrifice another pawn here. So he played bishop g6, allowing bishop takes e6 check, pawn takes, queen goes to b3, the knight is still attacked, and the pawn is attacked. So white is winning another pawn, but it came at a huge price, because after queen takes e6, rook f7, look at the light squares, look at this king. And the threat, knight c5, knight d3 is absolutely devastating. If this knight lands on d3, then it is pretty much game over. So Gukash, under a lot of pressure here, the computer says it is close to losing. He needs to play, absolutely needs to play knight to d4 now to even stay in the game at all. But I think after knight c5, queen takes c6, I mean, this looks very, very dire. King d1, and maybe even keep the queens on the board with a move like queen d8, or maybe take on b2 first. I mean, this looks like ruins with the king so open and the light square is so weak, Tanya.
And Gukash finds it. He finds the only defensive resource that you're pointing out, knight d4. There was no fighting the threat of knight c5. So Gukash trying to gain more material in compensation for this inflowing attack. Magnus immediately blitzes out knight c5. The line that you were pointing out is on the board. I'm not expecting Magnus to trade queens anytime soon. Gukash had to sidestep with his king to d1 as we're seeing these moves being played really fast, Peter, by the players. A forced sequence of moves. I'm expecting Magnus to decline the queen trade by falling back.
Yes, on the other hand, probably has so many tempting options. He's certainly enjoying it, and when you get a position like this, and you know that you have played this stunning move, short castle, and then everything what happened basically gives you the feeling that all the right choices had been made. Yeah, this gives you also so much pleasure. That suddenly the moment comes in when you think like, wow, freestyle chess is just fantastic. Yeah, and the opposite side, Gukash, he lost the first game with the white pieces. Is it correct? Yes, I think he had double whites. And now he's again in a nightmare kind of scenario against Magnus Carlsen, and this is a very strategical position, yeah, when we know exactly that Magnus has the total vision how to make the most of it. A very tough challenge on Gukash. That will he be able to survive this? Honestly, I believe not, because this is very much Magnus's territory.
And I think freestyle chess also feels like Magnus's territory. And the reason I say that is he's often spoken about, one of the reasons why he did not fight for the World Championship, just the preparation that's involved, the format that goes into where the players only start fighting after a very long number of moves. And it's not something that he's ever been really happy about. We see the world #1 pulling away more and more from standard classical chess, because I think he just finds this a lot more challenging. He finds this a lot more creative, and he enjoys himself when he's feeling challenged. So for him, this is his territory. The sacrifice that we saw from Magnus earlier on, Peter, in this position, it's clear that this is where he thrives.
Well, he loves it for sure.
He loves it.
If you are on the side who delivers all the beauties and all these possibilities playing in the spirit, that's of course fantastic. And Magnus is not taking his time, because Queen D8, the move that Nicholas highlighted, is kind of, once you know it, it makes perfect sense. On the other hand, you have so many possibilities and everything looks tempting. How do you make up your mind? How do you choose that exact move that you have to play because you can only play one? This is kind of a challenge.
And let's point out these different possibilities that you're pointing out, right? You want to start with, either you trade queens, fall back. The other really tempting one that you're highlighting on the board, knight takes b2, coming in, grabbing a pawn with the check. There are other checks on the board, but perhaps knight f2 is not as tempting as grabbing that b2 pawn. And it's not an easy decision. That's clear with the amount of time Magnus is taking in this position. Also, we know what a maestro he is with queens off the board. The rook on e1 is hanging. You can start getting greedy with a trade of queens and then eventually picking up the rook. What are we expecting? What do you think? If you had to predict, what will be Magnus's final decision here?
I think it's very difficult to highlight anything here that could be, because look at his pose. He wants to make a move because he knows that probably every single decision is good. I have to just stick with one. But the temptation, yeah, there are so many good options. This is one of the nightmares for the player, yeah, that you have a good position, you would love to have only one good move, I can blitz it out, put the pressure on my opponent. Yeah, let's take a look. Yeah, Magnus is trying to make his decision about to move.
He reaches out, Peter. He does grab the b2 pawn, so he decides not to touch the queen for the moment, comes in with the tempo. The problem of plenty, when you've got so many good choices, it's never easy to make one of them. Nicholas, what do you think about Magnus's approach here? He goes for the greedy one.
Yes, he does take the pawn on b2, which was definitely one of the attractive options in the position here. Knight takes b2. The king will go to e2, very likely. And now queen d8. Maybe this is his idea, to first take the pawn, because it is a free pawn he can take with check, and now to bring the queen back to d8. And this also looks very, very sensible, because in the end, if we count the pawns, white is only up 2 pawns, and they're not beautiful pawns, let's be real. They're all isolated, they're all weak. The king is being chased in the center of the board. So white doesn't really have a lot to show for his weak king and the attack that he's suffering. So I think this is a very sensible approach. As we pointed out, black should definitely, absolutely not trade the queens, because this would just...
He does it.
He does it.
Wow.
Really?
Wow.
No way. I'm shocked. I'm very much shocked, because now the king feels much, much safer. Immediately, the queen is the strongest piece in chess and the strongest attacking piece and most dangerous for the king. So once you take it off, this king on e2, it breathes a sigh of relief. It's so happy that the king is not getting checkmated now. I'm really surprised. Guys, what do you make of this trade of queens by Magnus? Is he so confident in this endgame?
Well, the big question is, how does he intend to follow it up? Did he make a move?
Rip to see it. We've got action coming in as the players blitz out. He does come in with a tempo against the knight. So queen takes queen, knight takes queen. We see Magnus developing the rook, attacking the knight. And isn't the a5 pawn on pre? What am I missing here, Peter?
Well, honestly, I would like to stabilize the position, but let me try to make those moves. Yeah, king e2 takes, rook c8 on the board. Yeah, this is the current position. Magnus is going after the c3 pawn, yeah, and he's trying to combine it with bishop h5 check. I think that's the reason why he opted for the trade of queens, because this is a very direct approach. Hitting the knight, where do you go? If you go, then you might run into bishop h5 check, king e3, rook takes c3 check, and king e4. If that's not checkmate after bishop g6, actually it's not, because if the king journey continues then to d5, yeah, for example, just to highlight, yeah, if white plays a move like knight d4, but also maybe black can just afford simply to capture on c3 first, and then again the bishop h5 moves, bishop d3 checks are hanging in the air. It's so devastating.
And Gukash plays the only move to stay in the game, and this is probably what Magnus had missed. The move e6. e6, a counterattack against the rook on f7. If the knight had moved, if the knight had taken on a5, moved to d4, it would have been completely over. The position would have been lost. But Gukash finds e6 very importantly, and the rook has to keep being connected to the pawn on e7, because otherwise there's a potential fork against king and rook. So first Magnus gives a check, the king steps up, now rook to g7, and now what was played? Nothing was played yet. Now there are different options. The knight can come back to e5. g4 is a potential move, very difficult, but there are options also. Rook ab1. White is out of the woods here. Gukash can survive this game if he finds the right moves now going forward, but the worst seems to be over, Tanya.
He's definitely relieved after that queen trade. So much pressure on that white king. And now Magnus has to do it all over again in this endgame. But we know all about the legendary Magnus touch in the endgames. Gukash falls back with the knight. So he is finding all the right defenses here, not getting greedy with that a5 pawn, because you need as many pieces closer to your king to keep squares guarded, to keep your king protected. Magnus, meanwhile, continued chomping off the pawns. Eventually, the c3 pawn will also be under attack. If white steps up with that king to f4, attacking the rook, I think black can make a small move like h6, Peter. Just defending the rook, and then with a killer idea of sliding the other rook to f8 with some threatening checks coming in.
Yes, we also see that suddenly this knight on e5 is so nice, because it kind of restricts black's knight on b2. Yeah, just a couple of moves ago, I wanted to highlight that that monster bishop on g6 was the soul of black's position. Yeah, so I really believe, and I agree with Nicholas, that Magnus must have missed the move e6. Yeah, this intermezzo was missed, because otherwise he would have never have chosen this. And when we are also looking at the body language of the players, Gukash suddenly seems like he knows that he has a chance. Yeah, he has something to play with, and he plays the move king d4, which means that after rook d8 check, he wants to block the check with knight d7, and he's getting active. Okay, Magnus could eventually fall back with bishop to 8, targeting the knight on d7, but it looks much better than before for white.
Yeah, and you have to, and the check is on the board, and he does block it with that knight. Again, coming back to the point of e6 being not only an attacking move, but a key defensive move in the position of taking control of some very important squares. Again, to block up all the files that the black rook is attacking on. This is anyone's game. It's a game, it's a position for all three results. Give white a couple of moves, give Gukash a couple of moves. That knight from d2 jumping onto e4, hitting that rook. The rook from a1 going to b1, hitting that knight on b2, also attacking the pawn on b5. Bishop e8. Nicholas, is that the critical move in this position?
So what I would say is that, like you guys pointed out already, Gukash must be very happy to even reach this position to begin with. And I think Carlson will be kicking himself right now that he did not keep the queens on the board, did not go for the attack, and that he missed this intermezzo move e6. I would like to go to another game which we really haven't seen much at all right now, and Vincent might be upset with us because already in the last round we didn't cover his game that much. And the reason is that we're just having much more exciting games going on right now. But I would like to take a brief look at his game against Levon Aronian. So we are in this current position here of the bishop h3. Just to briefly see how we got there, because we really haven't covered it in this round so far. After the middle game, the queens were traded off early. just like in the game against Carlson. And here, slowly both players got their piece into game. We again saw this long, short castle, as Magnus also played, and Sarana and firouzja as well. And now we slowly get updated. Here, black traded the bishop against the knight, so white has the bishop pair now. And I would prefer white here. White has a little bit more space, has the bishop pair. The computer doesn't give a lot of advantage for white, but I would definitely prefer white. Black has some potential play here on the b file. Also, it feels a little bit loose, not clear yet what to do with this king. The king, I would rather have it somewhere else than on c1. So I think some practical problems for white, but overall Vincent seems to be in decent shape, and he plays c5 instantly now, and it seems the position is getting more sharp. The bishop is opened up, the knight is attacked, will probably go to f5, and one has to see what to do with this king. This is a big question for me, because I feel like it cannot stay there. Position is opening up, and there might be some pressure for this king. Peter, what do you make of this?
Yeah, it's a big strategical battle. I also see that Vincent has only 1.5 minutes left against 4.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but on the other hand, with c5 now, he's also opening up the diagonal for the bishop. There are some ideas like knight f3 to g5, using that pin, hitting that bishop on h3. One concern I have also, like, what do we do with this king? Do we castle, but then the king still remains on c1? Slightly awkward. A lot to play for, but I feel like maybe in the Magnus's game, we might be having now some direct action, because there was direct confrontation. This will be a much longer struggle.
Yes, I think this one, Vincent in driver's seat. The king can perhaps step to d2, connect the rooks. We will keep an eye out on this one, but let's head over to the Magnus game, which has been quite exciting from the start. Even this end game that we have, queens have been traded off, but the fire doesn't stop. We see this last move on the board, rook to g6. It was hitting that pawn on e6, and a trap being set up. So clever by Gukash. This move threatens a big discovered check on the board. You're pointing out all the dynamics, Peter. If black takes on e6, there's knight to f6 check, picking up that rook on d8. Magnus needs to watch out.
Yeah, he needs to watch out, and Gukash probably feels like, okay, finally this is real chess. Yeah, this is where I know where my pieces belong. His king on d4 is not vulnerable at all. His rook on, it was incredible, yeah, because first with e6, then knight e5, knight d7, he activated his knight. Now he's making use of the e5 square by activating his rook all the way to d5. Incredible, yeah. This is even hard to assess. Is Magnus still safe, or is he still pressing, or is white not taking over? What's going on?
The good news for Magnus is he's got an extra couple of minutes, so he can slow down and think, and there's a big traffic jam on the d file. We see the black rook, the white knight, the white rook, the white king, and the white knight all lined up. Tactics galore. Is it time for black to sidestep with the king? Perhaps a little move with the king to make sure there are no checks. What are the options for black here, Nicholas?
In fact, Gukash is slowly taking over. He has really defended this endgame masterfully after Magnus gave him the chance to come back, even trading the queens. And now, as you guys pointed out, there's a strong threat of knight f6 check, winning the rook on d8. So king g7 or king h8 were pretty much forced. And now, Gukash can drop back with the knight to c5, protecting the pawn on e6, and you would think that this pawn would drop off eventually, but now it's protected. If the rooks are traded, the king is active, why not? The rook is still coming in via b1. White is still up a pawn after all, let's not forget that. So Gukash might in fact have winning chances here in this position. Yeah, the rooks should be traded after all, even though I wouldn't be happy about it with black. And now the king, before it was always a weakness and was chased around. Now in the endgame, it can really be a huge trump for white. And I think Gukash has winning chances here.
Wow, the king is a piece in the endgame, and what a piece it's turning out to be on d4, always eyeing the queenside pawns of Magnus Carlson, just one step away from trying to attack them. Any piece trade suits white perfectly. Peter, I think Magnus is in a bit of a trouble here. He's down a pawn. White's king super active. Those queenside pawns are in extreme danger. Meanwhile, that rook and bishop, yes, it's eyeing e6. Okay, I'm slightly surprised with this move because I was expecting knight to c5. It looked like a very natural move, but this one also hits the rook and the bishop. If black was to trade on d5, I want some help from you. Point out the tactics to us. What happens after rook takes rook, king takes rook, and bishop takes pawn coming in with a check?
Yeah, I think we just fall back with the king to d4, for example, and we just enjoy this knight on e5. We are hitting the rook. The rook isn't really doing much, and we're already coming with a tempo with rook b1, and if the knight moves the b5 pawn, we'll be falling. And we have been discussing about seeing Magnus before leaning backwards, enjoying the situation. Now when I saw him, he was leaning back from total frustration. You know, he's back at the board. He is just so angry with himself that how did I let this happen from that marvelous position? And now it's white risks absolutely nothing, so that Gukash is down to a minute. If he keeps the control, then the clock won't be such an, let's not forget, it's 10 seconds increment.
Which is a lot of time to start gaining on the clock, a 10-second increment, but Gukash has to keep control not only on the position but his nerves as well. Undoubtedly, he's feeling that he's the one who's pushing in this position. Every single initiative that Magnus had has been neutralized. The queens have been traded off. White's king and knight super active. The only thing that Gukash needs to do is get that rook into the game. And the good news for him is it's coming in with the tempo. The line we were discussing is on the board. Gukash now thinking about where to move his king. King to c5 does invite the move rook to g5, pinning on the 4th rank. But there might be ideas of the other knight jumping into the attack with a tempo with knight f3. Can king c5 be considered here?
Yes, but he's down to a minute. Yeah, these are his problems. Yeah, if suddenly there are many tempting options, that's a total nightmare scenario. Yeah, just somehow stabilize, make sure that...
Cemento.
Yeah, cemento, you know that nothing can happen to you. I'm going to press the clock, I'm going to get the 10 extra seconds, and I know rook b1 to b4 and king d4 on the board.
It is Team Cemento for Gukash. He keeps things protected, not going into any crazy lines, allowing the pins. The rook comes into the attack. Magnus Carlson is in trouble in this endgame.
Absolutely. Yeah, basically now the point is that it's kind of a one-sided affair, and now Magnus is the one who needs some miracle that maybe somehow his rook will be in time to get to d6, deliver a check in time to limit the damage. Yeah, like bishop takes a2 followed by rook d6 check. I'm not sure if it's enough, but that's maybe kind of the defensive resource he's relying on.
Magnus can pick up that pawn on a2. Gukash can pick up that pawn on a5, and the line that you're pointing out, it does allow some checks. But right now Magnus is on the think, and we look at him on our camera, on our screen. He is not looking happy with what has happened in this game. He was so in control, playing for the compensation, playing against that white king. But it all came down to the decision of trading off the queens. Perhaps we'll highlight that critical moment once this game is ended. Both players now also fighting the clock. Magnus has to make a move. He has to keep the pressure on. He's thinking what to do. What is he going to go for now? How does he keep fighting in this position? Do you think he's going to grab the a2 pawn, Peter?
Well, if there is no direct tactical refutation, then it's very tempting. Yeah, you want to eliminate something. I'm also wondering that some c3, c4 trapping that bishop on a2. Is that the problem? Yeah, because let me just highlight. Yeah, bishop takes a2. We play c3, c4. And after rook d6 check, we simply fall back with the king to e3. And the knight on d2 and knight on e5 are beautifully protecting the c4 pawn. We are setting to go rook takes a5, putting tremendous pressure on those two awkwardly placed pieces on the queen side. Wow, but if Magnus can't grab the pawn on a2, then what does he do? Yeah, what kind of options he has, and he's struggling. Yeah,
he goes for it. He goes for bishop a2. Will Gukash find c4? This is such a beautiful idea, trapping. You've got rook a5, you've got rook attacking the pieces, and we're seeing this line being played out. Bishop into pawn on the board, and Gukash finds it.
Yes. Of course he finds it. He's just incredibly strong player. He was struggling at the beginning of the event. Now he is very much in his zone.
Can Gukash finish this job off? Nicholas, we're analyzing this position and we're trying to find these ideas. How easy is this for a conversion? Gukash can drive his seat, but what are the things that he needs to watch out for?
Yeah, what's difficult for him is, of course, the time situation. He is clearly better, maybe even winning or close to winning, but he has 20 seconds as I'm talking right now, and he's only getting 10 seconds with every move. Carlson took another pawn on h2, And now the correct reply would be to bring the knight back, defending the knight on d2, hitting the rook, and next you can just take this pawn on a5, screw the knight and the bishop on the a file, and well, something's going to drop, or am I mistaken? It looks like something's going to drop, but what is Gukash going to do? Has he moved? Has he played a move?
Yeah,
what is
he
the current
played
position?
knight. Yeah, I think he played knight d2 f3.
The more natural looking move. You want to move forward. You don't want to move backwards.
Yes, that's unfortunate because now you keep the rook on the second rank, also defending the bishop on a2. So now that after rook g2, for example, rook takes a5, the difference is the knight can go back to b6 and the bishop on a2 is defended. If you had the other knight now on d2, you could just take this bishop, but still he has very good chances. However, there is now this idea, for example, to take on c4 and go and trade off everything. So we see another rook and knight against rook endgame, even though the line continues here with the marvelous move, knight h4, threatening suddenly knight f5 and rook a8 checkmate. Let me just show this to you. If the rook moves somewhere, let's say here, then it is suddenly a checkmate. All right, well, before we get lost here, we got to go back to the game. What is the current position? What was played?
He played rook h6.
Rook
and
h5
h6 was played. Okay.
and rook d6 check. The king comes back. And Gukash, at 22nd, Magnus Carlson, under a minute on the clock. There's still a lot of pressure on that A file. The knight and the bishop hanging by a thread here. Can white go rook to A3, eyeing that knight on C3, the key defender?
That looks very logical and very strong.
Gukash, he's reaching out. He's about to make his move. He needs to play.
Lose on time.
It's on the board. I think knight d1 is the only move here.
Yes.
And we see the evaluation bar is creeping up. Peter?
Wow.
What's going on in this position? It's crazy.
Yeah, this knight d1 check, but it also doesn't feel nice. Yeah, the knight will be kind of stranded there. It might get trapped. Yeah, we were talking about the bishop being trapped on a2. Maybe the bishop survives and then suddenly black's knight will get into a lot of trouble.
And that last move by Gukash was made with 2 seconds on the clock. He's on 12 seconds. It's a 10-second increment, so the players have to watch out. Magnus also makes a move. The check on the board. The bishop goes to b1. And now the c pawn is advancing. It's going down the board. The knight on e5 guards the c6 square. It's not going to stop at c5.
Rook d5 trying to... Okay, but yeah, the knight is trapped. The c pawn is running.
The bishop falls back, taking control of the queening square, but Magnus is clearly on the defense. He's hanging by a thread. The material is equal, but the problem in black's position is the knight you're highlighting. It's just not coming back to fight the c6 pawn.
Yeah, not at all. And also white still has this monster pawn on c6. The only good news is that white's rook on a3 can't really move because then the knight jumps back. c7 played.
But what does he want after rook c5?
Then the knight is lost.
Oh, the knight on d1 is just hanging, so he needs to first move the knight, which he does. Knight b2 played. Rook c5 is the idea next. But will you have time? Maybe he'll just pursue that knight with the move rook to a2. And he does it. He's attacking. He's not giving time to Magnus Carlson.
No. And look at Magnus. Yeah, he knows that this is not going according to plans. And this is not terrible because he might have to give up the piece. Yeah, you can't, because the c pawn is about to queen. Yeah, so black's bishop is overloaded.
And the big question is, what do you do? Do you go rook to b5, tying down your rook to defend that knight? Or do you go knight to d1, again tying down your rook to that knight? Magnus, you can see the hesitation in him. He knows it's no pleasant choices.
And wow, rook c2 played after knight d1 because the bishop is overloaded. You can't take on c2 because of c8 queen. And now the knight on d1 has nowhere to go.
You have to fall back, and I think it's on the board, bishop c8, because c8 was the big threat on the board. But how do you finish this off? Peter, there has to be... And he obstructs. He comes in the way of that rook and the knight. Magnus Carlson is about to lose that piece on d1. But still, the knight on d3 is also hanging.
Yeah, but he can follow it up with knight f3 to e5, get the stability, and everything is protected. Basically, we might be talking about a scenario where nothing can go wrong because everything is super protected, and the pawn on c7 is a monster.
And Magnus trying to bring the king into play, and we see the rook now coming to attack because the knight on d1 is trapped. That knight on d3 takes away key squares. Magnus Carlson, look at him. He looks like he's close to resignation, but he's throwing in the punches. e4 coming in. This guy never gives up.
No, of course, never. Yeah, you have to fight, and it's a time scramble. If you can somehow create some even ghost threats, yeah, something that is objectively losing, but you confuse the opponent, it's fine. Gukash takes that pawn. And knight b2.
The knight is out. How does Magnus find these ideas? It's unbelievable.
Wow. Look at one check.
And the point is that the white knight can't take the black knight because the knight on e5 is hanging. In seconds, Magnus finds a way to survive hanging. It's a tightrope he's walking on, but he is walking on it. Knight check. The king will step over, attacking that knight on c6. He needs to stay connected to the white knight.
Yes, he needs to king d6. And where does it end? Look, f6 check, king c7. White collects the knight. Yeah, knight takes b2. Is there some trick? Does not seem like. It seems like Gukash has just managed to survive all this time scramble. He's now also very well up on the clock. Yes, 34 seconds stability. If there is some more crazy scenario, you can spend some time to find the solution.
And Magnus there, he's feeling shifty in his chair. He's down a piece. If he can somehow trade or grab that g3 pawn, it's still a draw. But it's far away because white's king is so close to defending that pawn on g3. Magnus trying to think of ways to trick his opponent right now. He first puts pressure on that knight to c6.
Yeah, knight b4 looks like a tempting option. Yeah, just to go back, get stability, get the other knight to d3, king to f2. Yeah, Magnus goes rook h5. Knight b2 to d3 would be kind of very tempting, just to coordinate the pieces. Knight c4, ambitious move. Going after the black's king. Yeah, rook f7 check. Wow, these youngsters are fearless.
He wants to give checkmate even in this position. The knight on b4, c4, taking away all the squares from black's king. So not only up a piece, but going for a mating attack here. Gukash putting pressure on the bishop on b7. Magnus goes all the way far away from those white threatening knights, and maybe the knight can start jumping in. Knight a6 check. You have to go to a8 with your king.
Yes, but it's not checkmate yet. So maybe you just protect that pawn first because black is not running away. What? Yeah, and Magnus resigned.
Wow.
Checkmate.
Unreal. And we did see a checkmate in the end with the knight coming back. Rook to a7 was the big threat. Knight to c7 is the other big threat. Gukash gets it done. He wins against the world #1 in freestyle chess. What a game that was. Just amazing.
Yeah, what a turnaround.
What a turnaround.
And yeah, Magnus will be very upset with himself. From a dream scenario, it turned into a complete nightmare scenario. These are the things, these are the losses that are the most difficult to digest, yeah, because you have only yourself to blame.
17-year-old Gukash, a big win for him, a huge confidence boost for him. He's definitely one of the players who wants more experience in this format. He wants to play more of freestyle chess, so to get that win against Magnus, especially after the start he had in round 1.
Wow, but look at, sorry to interrupt, also the game between Vincent Keymer and Levon Aronian has ended. Vincent has beaten Levon Aronian and they are discussing the game right now.
And let's head over to the last position as well. Vincent, who's been on fire lately, winning the Division 2 of the chessable Masters, comes in, holds Magnus Carlson in game 1, takes down Levon Aronian in game 2. And the point in this position is that a7 pawn is so strong and Levon just doesn't have the time to capture it if you fall back with your king to b7, stopping it from promoting the other pawn. Gets the job done. c6 incoming.
Yes, and look at this. What a fascinating position. c6 check, king a8. For example, you push c7, you box your own bishop on b8. Black can play the move king knight d6, but then white has all the freedom. King d4, white picks up the d5 pawn, then continues the journey, can travel to d7, but even can just go towards the king side and collect everything. Black is completely tied down. Nothing else than to resign for black here.
Fantastic finish there by Vincent. What a round this was, and still thinking about all the turnarounds that we witnessed in the Magnus Gukash game. What was the highlight for you, Nicholas?
Well, I want to point out that we saw 3 white wins in this round. Not only did Vincent beat Levon Aronian and Gukash beat Magnus, but also Nordebek beat Dingley Ren. So this was really a round of the jacks beating the kings. Nordebek beating King Ding and Vincent beating Levon and Gukash beating Carlson. The only game that was drawn was between Alireza and Fabiano. So another exciting round. We didn't really even have a chance to see the finishes of the other 2 games as we're so focused on this really captivating game between Gukash and Magnus. And for me, that was the game of the round, because the way that Gukash managed to defend, then take over, and then in the time scramble keep his nerves together and find the only way to when Magnus still posed problems, he found the only way to keep the extra piece or to win the piece and then bring the point home against the #1 in the world, and for many the GOAT in chess. That was very, very impressive. So Gukash definitely has arrived in the tournament after the loss in the first round, and Magnus, with half a point after 2 rounds, will not be happy, guys.
Definitely he's not going to be happy, but the one player who will be very happy is the 18-year-old Gukash. And what a game it was, seizing his opportunity. He had that king out in the open, but then eventually in the end game after queen trades, when he did get the chance, he did not back down. He did not neutralize the advantage. He did not just bail out of the situation, took that opportunity, and that's what makes these youngsters so dangerous. There are 2 more games coming.